I am Mr. K, and today we will talk about history of Judaism. Judaism is the world's oldest monotheistic religion. It dates back nearly 4,000 years. Followers of Judaism believe in one God who revealed himself through ancient prophets. The history of Judaism is essential to understanding the Jewish faith, which has a rich heritage of law, culture, and tradition. Jewish people believe there is only one God who has established a covenant or special agreement with them. Their God communicates to believers through prophets and rewards good deeds while also punishing the evil. Most Jews, with the exception of a few people, believe that their Messiah hasn't come yet, but will one day. Jewish people worship in holy places known as synagogues, and their spiritual leaders are called rabbis, teachers. The six-pointed Star of David is the symbol of Judaism. Today, there are about 14 million Jews worldwide. Most of them live in the United States and Israel. Traditionally, a person is considered Jewish if his or her mother is Jewish. Well, if the mother is not Jewish and the father is Jewish, for example, the person can go through a special process called Giur to become Jewish. That happens very often when the Jewish man marrying non-Jewish woman, but he wants that his children would be Jewish. Therefore, the wife who accepts husband's faith will go through that 1 year process of rabbinical school and learning about the traditions and cultures, and then he or she has to pass the test, take the special bath, and now she's considered to be Jewish. And her children now will become Jewish by the mother, by the law. The Jewish sacred text is called Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. It includes the same books as the Old Testament in the Christian Bible, but they're placed in slightly different order. The Torah, the first 5 books of Tanakh, outlines the law for Jews to follow. The origin of Jewish faith are explained through the Torah. According to the text, God first revealed himself to Abraham, who became known as the founder of Judaism. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am El Shaddai. Walk with me and be trustworthy. I will make a covenant between us, and I will give you many, many descendants. Abraham fell on his face, and God said to him, but me, my covenant is with you. You will be the ancestor of my many nations. And because I have made you the ancestor of many nations, your name will no longer be Abraham, but Abraham. I will make you very fertile. I will produce nations from you, and kings will come from you. I will set up my covenant with you and your descendants after you in every generations, an enduring covenant. I will be your God and your descendants' God after you. You know, that covenant doesn't come without a price. That's a very serious agreement. So, here comes the price. This is my covenant that you and your descendants must keep. Circumcise every male. You must circumcise the flesh of your foreskins, and it will be the symbol of the covenant between us. On the 8th day after birth, every male in every generation must be circumcised, including those who are not your own children. those born in your household, and those purchased with silver from foreigners. It means even slaves must be brought to the covenant. Now, here's a question. What it means? Why? What is the reason for such painful, because at that time they didn't have anesthesia, painful procedure? You need to remember that in Middle East, it's pretty much a desert. Oh, now, no, Israel watered the land, there are many gardeners, but at that time, that land was pretty much desert. There was not enough water to drink, and not enough water to clean your body, to wash your body. And the problem is that in uncircumcised males have to really clean their penises to prevent accumulation of the dirt called smegma underneath the foreskin, because if that smegma gets inside the woman during the intercourse, a woman can become infertile. I'm not talking about the cervical cancer, I'm talking about just infertility or pelvic inflammatory disease. But they didn't know about that in that time. They didn't know about those problems. They knew empirical way, by experience, that if you don't wash your penis, that it might happen. The problem and demographic suppression. If you want your offsprings become like stars in the sky, your women supposed to be fertile and not having pelvic inflammatory disease. Simple way. You cannot tell people that you have to cut the foreskin so you would be clean and women wouldn't have the problem. People wouldn't understand. But if you say this is a covenant with God, God said that, God is a higher authority. You can't argue with that. And that will work. And actually it worked. It worked. It worked for all descendants of Abraham. It means Jews and Muslims. And in some even African tribes who have nothing to do with Judaism or Islam, their males undergo circumcision. And even now, statistics proves that in that African tribes, the tribes which promote the circumcision under whatever reason, they have less occurrence of HIV and AIDS. That's a fact. So, that was very wise agreement, even though it looked very barbaric at that time. Be sure you circumcise those born in your household and those purchased with your silver. Your flesh will embody my covenant as an enduring covenant. Any uncircumcised male whose flesh of his foreskin remains uncircumcised will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Jews believe that God made a special covenant with Abraham, and that he and his descendants were chosen people who would create a great nation. Abraham's son Isaac and his grandson Jacob also became central figures in ancient Jewish history. Jacob took the name Israel, and his children and future generations became known as Israelites. Well, there is another son Abraham had. His name was Ishmael. He was the first son. You see, in the beginning, his wife Sarah, Abraham's wife Sarah, she didn't have children for many years. So Sarah agreed that Abraham, because he needed to have the son, he would have special intimate relations with one of his servants, Agar. And Agar brought to Abraham Ishmael. However, even though Abraham loved Ishmael, And Ishmael, by the way, was circumcised when he was 13. According to the Bible, Abraham took his son Ishmael and those born in his household and all those purchased with his silver, that is, every male in Abraham's household, and he circumcised the flesh of the foreskin that same day, just as God had told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin, and his son Ishmael was 13 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised. However, when Sarah became pregnant with Isaac and she bore Isaac, Isaac became the official son of Abraham, because Hagar was not official wife. And according to the Bible, Sarah forced Abraham to take Ishmael and his wife to the desert, from which, of course, they didn't die in the desert. They actually became the origination of the Arab nation. Therefore, Arabs and Jews, they all think and they all see Abraham as their forefathers. In Arabs, it is Ibrahim. Ibrahim, Abraham, same person. And therefore, it comes as the circumcision for both nations, pretty much relatives. Okay, so more than 1,000 years after Abraham, the prophet Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt after being enslaved for hundreds of years. You know, that story is well known. You've probably seen those movies. You've seen those movies, Moses, you know, let my people go, something like that. Yeah? That's the story about those torturers of Egypt that God brought, including the death of the firstborn Egyptians, which I, you know, feel kind of difficult understanding that, but who argues with God? That's his decision. Moses didn't see the promised land himself. He died on the boulders. For 40 years, Moses was walking around the desert with Israelites from Egyptian slavery. If you look at the map, from the Egypt right now to the Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, it's pretty much, well, okay, even if you walk, it's a couple of weeks, no months, maximum. Okay, let's say you have like a bunch of people, big bunch of people, you have to travel with all, okay, let's take 2 months. Okay, with all the stops, breaks, you know, the women need time, children screaming, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. I mean, if you really take your time, but not 40 years. What took him 40 years and why? It's a simple answer. To wipe out all slaves. All slave generations, everybody who was slave from Egypt died during those 4 years. And during those 4 years, the new generation was created. The new group emerged, the warriors, fighters, those who can survive, those who can fight, those who can win. And that group of fighters, Moses brought to the promised land, which later became known as Israel. The land from which they came from to Egypt 1,000 years before. The land which was promised by God to Abraham, the Israel. According to the scriptures, God revealed his law, known as the 10 Commandments, to Moses on the Mount Sinai. You all know those 10 Commandments. I will read you from the original 10 Commandments, which Interesting, important, because it is the rules which influence the culture and behavior for many people, including two main religions, the Judaism and Christianity. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. What mean other gods? You see, Judaism was the first monotheistic religion, even though, as we know, many years before in Egypt, in that polytheistic religion, one pharaoh whose name was Amenhotep IV or Echnaton tried to create monotheistic religion of the solar disk Aton. Didn't last long, ended with his death. When he died, everything reversed back, and his son, whose name was Tutankhamun, after the death of his father, became known as Tutankhamun, which you already know. You heard about him. I'm sure some of you even went to the exhibit of his treasures when they arrived in Los Angeles. Yahweh or Jehovah, the name of the God of Israelites, was only one of many gods when he came to Abraham. And he came to Abraham to become the God of the nation. So he will be the special God. He needed to have his nation. Later on, he became the only God, and the other gods didn't exist. But even in this text, we can see that God says there will be no other gods, only me. In the Bible, when you remember Adam ate an apple and of the knowledge, and the God says, now he became like us. Not now he became like me. He says, now he became like us. That means there are more than one. That's interesting facts for you to consider. 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, not to serve them. The interesting thing about all those images created by the current churches who follow the Ten Commandments, and they create those statues and icons and worship them as they are the representation of the God, which in the second commandment it totally says clearly, do not do that. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. When I read this, it's very interesting how the God who says, I am jealous God, I don't want you to follow anybody else. Jealousy is really the feeling, as we know in psychology, feeling of inadequacy. And putting those for the God, saying, I am a jealous God, would pretty much putting that God down to the level of inadequacy, insecurity, low self-esteem. It's like, I don't want you to go anywhere. I'm your God. I'm jealous. I would understand if the woman said that. But that's scripture. I didn't make it up. I'm reading it from the Bible. Yeah. Number 3. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Okay. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day in the Sabbath of the Lord your God, in it you shall do not work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. Very precise, you know. It means nobody, it means nobody. And I'm just like, I don't see over there saying anything about mother-in-law. Only mother-in-law can work. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that on them, and rested on the 7th day. Well, we have the 7 days. That's Sabbath. You know, our calendar actually ends on the Sabbath, on Saturday. And if you look at that, that starts with Sunday. In many countries, the week starts on Monday and ends on Sunday. We call it weekend, Saturday and Sunday. But all our calendars, for the reason that the 7th day is supposed to be Saturday, actually put Saturday at the end of the calendar, which sometimes difficult to understand, but well, we got used to it. We know now why. Therefore, the Lord bless the Sabbath, the day, and hallow that. Shabbat is recognized as a day of the rest and prayer for Jews. It typically begins in sunset on Friday and lasts until nightfall on Saturday. Observing Shabbat can take many forms, depending on the type of Judaism that a Jewish family may follow. Orthodox and conservative Jews, for example, may refrain from performing any physical labor, using any electrical device or other prohibited activities, driving cars, for example, anything. Well, you see, there are many jokes about it. And like, for example, the Jewish man comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I want to jump from the plane with the chute. Can I do that on Sabbath? And Rabbi said, yes, you can jump from the plane on Sabbath, but you cannot pull the ring. It's a work. Most observant Jews celebrate Shabbos by reading or discussing Torah, attending synagogue, socializing with other Jews. You know, this is interesting custom. We all so busy with our lives. Every day we work, and it's very difficult to find a time for your family. Those who observe that Shabbat by the rules, because this is an unbreakable rule, you have to celebrate Shabbat, you have to rest on this day. You have to start on Friday evening until the first star goes on the sky, until the Saturday evening, you do not work. This time is dedicated to your family and to God. Or, well, okay, God is jealous, to God and your family. You have to spend time thinking about your soul, your spirit, your behavior. You have to spend time with people who are close to you. They also need to have time. In this life, there is always supposed to be time for the God and for the family. It's interesting tradition. And the observant Jews, they really follow that. And nothing will make them work on Saturday. So for us, we need to understand that we wouldn't schedule any of the diagnostic tests or any procedures on Saturday, unless, of course, it's a life-threatening. Then it's exclusion. Okay, so according to the Bible, around 1000 years BC, King David ruled the Jewish people. His son Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, which became the central place of worship for Jews. The kingdom fell apart around 931 BC after the Jewish people split into groups, the Israelites in the north and Judea in the south. Someplace around 587, Babylonians destroyed the first temple and sent many Jews to exile. Second temple was built around 516 BC, but was eventually destroyed by Romans in 70 AD by Titus Vespasian Flavius. the Roman emperor. Well, actually, it was a son of the Roman emperor who became Roman emperor after his father Vespasian. There's interesting stories about that war where the Second Temple was destroyed. And one of those stories, actually, I want to tell you a story about Masada. It was the last fortress, last stronghold of Jewish rebellion against the Roman Empire. Around 1,000 people were staged in that place, and they were against 6,000, well, actually more than 6,000, it was more like 10,000 of the Romans. There was a 6,000 was 10th Iron Legion, which came to take them down. That fortress was totally untakeable. The Romans built the pandus to bring their wall-breaking machines. Israelis couldn't do anything about it. Slowly, day by day, the Romans built a huge pandus to bring their machines to the fortress. You can see that if you go to Israel, go to Masada. You can see that it's amazing. And when the Romans eventually stormed into that fortress, they found 1,000 dead people, children, men, women, who committed suicide. They killed themselves so they wouldn't become slaves. They didn't destroy any of their food or water supply. To show Romans that they could stay longer, that they didn't die because of starvation or lack of supply, they had supply. They were overwhelmed by the force. And they killed themselves. That fortress now becomes the point where the soldiers who go through the basic training in Israel, they end up in Masada. You know, they have that the last road march, like exam road march, and the commanders made it road march, saw what happened at the end of the road march during the night, when they come and in the sunrise, in the dawn light, they see the walls of Masada. It's amazing view. The walls of Masada, and the soldiers who were tired and exhausted, when they see those lights, they see that fortress which signifies their unbroken spirit of Israelites who prefer death to slavery. That's amazing psychological training for them. Well, I know that because one of my friends, he served in that army, and he told me about that. I was in Masada. I saw that. It was definitely amazing things about the history of Jews. And they always say, never again. It means they will never again submit to anyone. Anybody dies, they will fight to the end. That's their motto over there. So let's go further. So the Second Temple was destroyed, and destruction of the Second Temple was significant because Jewish people, after that destruction of the Second Temple, no longer had a primary place to gather. So they shifted their focus to worshiping in local synagogues, and they were pretty much spread around the world. Some of them who went north, they become known as Ashkenazi Jews. Some of them who went south to Africa became Sephardi Jews. But all the time they were trying to preserve their knowledge, their language, their culture through their all years of roaming around the world, because they were forbidden to go back to their place. While the Tanakh is considered the sacred text for Judaism, which includes Torah, many other important manuscripts we know and were composed in the later years after the destruction of the temple. They offered ideas how to interpret Tanakh, interpretation, and they document the oral laws that were not previously written down. Around 200 AD, scholars compiled the Mishnah. Mishnah is a text that describes and explains the Jewish code of law that was previously orally communicated. Later, the Talmud, a collection of teaching and commentaries of Jewish law, was created. The Talmud contains the Mishnah and another text known as Gemara, which examines the Mishnah. It includes the interpretation of the thousands of rabbis and outlines the importance of 613 commandments of Jewish law. 613 commandments. The things which you should do or you shouldn't do. You know, the Jewish people, they wear that undergarment with those little strings, they call tzitzit, and they have the nuts. If you calculate, there is 613 nuts, exactly for the number of the commandments to remember. You know, not to remember things. It's over there. The first version of the Talmud was finalized around 3rd century AD, and the second was around 5th AD. Judaism embraced several other written texts and commentaries. One example is the 13 Articles of Faith, which was written by the Jewish philosopher named Maimonides. So that was a lot of written traditions, written cultures, written ceremonies, written laws, what's commandments, which the Jewish people supposed to follow. And what's interesting, they do follow those traditions even now. And no, of course, you don't need to know all 613 commandments, but at least you need to understand the importance of it and the origin of those rules. So throughout history, Jewish people have been persecuted for their religious beliefs. Why? Because they didn't want to integrate. They didn't want to assimilate. They didn't want to become their part of the society as a living. They always stayed separated. And the people in many countries, they didn't like it because they don't like us. They're not like us. They're not like us. They're different. They're different. Why they're so different? Xenophobia. The different means bad. The different means, well, foreigner, hostile, need to be persecuted. If something happens in the country, we need to find the guilty. Who is the guilty? Well, definitely not us, because we are righteous. And definitely somebody different, not like us. The strangers. And who's a stranger among us? Them. Jewish. Jewish people were forbidden to be warriors, so they become bankers. They became bankers, artists, musicians, composers, philosophers, writers. They held the money. And medieval kings, they like to spend the money. But they need to have some money, not only by taxation, so they borrowed money from Jews. But the money, when you borrow, you're supposed to give back. And sometimes they have nothing to give back. So instead of giving back money to Jews, you can just persecute the Jews and say that they're wrong about everything. If you don't have a creditor, you don't have to give money back. Simple things. And that was pretty much one of the most common reasons for persecution of the Jews. Two things. They were different, and majority, they were pretty much creditors. And 1066 in Granada, there was a huge massacre of Jews. A Muslim mob stormed the royal palace in Granada, it's in Spain, and killed more than 1,000 Jewish families in one day. The group also kidnapped and crucified Joseph ibn Nahreya, the Jewish vizier to the Berbers king, one of the highest ranking official, was killed by the mob just because he was Jewish. In the first Crusades, in the time when the Christian Crusaders came to the Middle East, they killed a lot of Jewish, and many of them were forced to convert to Christianity. In 1492, Spanish rulers issued a royal edict that declared all Jews who refused to convert to Christianity would be expelled from the country. Many people had to convert to Christianity, but still they were persecuted because they believed that they still worship their Judaism in secret. Those were the dark days of the Jews. You all know Holocaust. In the 20th century, Nazi killed 6 million Jews only because they were Jews. Nothing else. Well, after Holocaust, many Jews returned to their homeland in the Middle East, the region known as Palestine. It used to be the Ottoman Empire. The whole land belonged to Ottoman Empire. After the First World War, the Ottoman Empire lost its power, and that land was controlled by the English administration, the Great Britain, French, Great Britain. So what happened? After the Second World War, the Jews returned to that land, which is called Palestine, under English mandate. And in 1948, Israel officially became an independent nation. David Ben-Gurion, one of the leading promoters of Jewish nation state, was given the title of Prime Minister. This event was considered a success for Jewish people who had tirelessly petitioned for an independent state in their homeland. However, the tension between Jewish and Arabs who lived in that place escalated in the years since Israel became a state, and are still ongoing today. If you look at the map, Israel is a very little state, surrounded by many Arab countries. Many of them now found a peace with Israel and coexist peacefully after many wars. Many of them still have tension. Just recently, the United Arab Emirates signed a treaty with Israel, ending that long years tension and creating the peaceful agreement, bringing the hope for peace on Middle East. Well, Judaism. Judaism also includes many different ways. There are several sects or branches or denominations in Judaism. It's not like one single religious view. There are many different branches. First of all is Orthodox. Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox Jews, known for their strict observance of traditional Jewish law and rituals. For instance, most believe Shabbat shouldn't involve working, driving, hanging money. I mean, this is like, for them, it is very strict. Orthodox Judaism is a diverse sect that includes several subgroups, including Hasidic Jews. It's Eastern European form, started in the 18th century and holds different values than traditional ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Hasidic Jews emphasize a mystical experience with God that involves direct communication through prayer and worship. Chabad is a well-known Orthodox Jews Hasidic movement. If you go to West Hollywood, you will find over there the Chabad synagogue, the Russian synagogue, because most of the Russian Jews came from Russia. They follow that Hasidic movement. Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism is considered a liberal category of religion that values ethical traditions over the strict observance of the Jewish laws. Followers promote progressive ideas and adaptation. Most of the Jews living in the United States follow the Reform Judaic tradition. Conservative Judaism. Many people consider this form of Judaism somewhat between the Orthodox and Reform Judaism. Typically, conservative Jews honor the traditions of the Judaism while allowing, some modernizations. For example, what difference between the Reform Judaism and Orthodox? In Orthodox Judaism, in synagogue, women sit separately from men. Men and women not sitting together in synagogue. Let me explain why. When you sit in place of worship and a lot of women around, it's very difficult for men to focus on the prayer. It's natural that men will look around and see beautiful faces. That's natural. So in Judaism, they solve this problem pretty radically. In the synagogue and a place of worship, men sitting separately from women. They don't see each other. It means when you're in a synagogue, you have to focus on only one thing: pray to God. God is very jealous, you know that. So when you talk to God, you talk to God. No other ways. Well, there is another one, another rule, which is very interesting. In Orthodox Judaism, conservative Judaism, the rabbis, the Jewish leaders, could be only men. In Reform Judaism, there was a rabbinu, the woman. The leader of the choir, cantor. In Orthodox Judaism, only men. Women cannot do that. In Reform Judaism, there could be a woman who would lead the choir for the synagogue, for the prayer. The rules of bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, it's when the child becomes the adult and has to go through a special ceremony of maturation of adulthood, where they actually can read the Torah in front of everybody. You see, only mature adult people can read the Torah. Children are supposed to listen to the Torah read by parents. So when the child considered to be adult, mature, that means they can marry after that officially, by the Jewish law, they read the Torah. It's a very big deal. Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah for boys, bat mitzvah for girls, the maturation celebration, the celebration of maturity. So it goes differently for the Orthodox and the Reformist Jews. And of course, it has its deviations, but pretty much it's a big deal for the Jewish family. There is a Reconstructionist Judaism. It's started in 1922, Humanistic Judaism in 1963. Interesting, Humanistic Judaism. They celebrate Jewish history and culture without emphasis on God. It means you can be Jew without following the Judaism. Interesting way of separating the religion and the culture, because for many centuries from the beginning of Judaism, Judaism was inseparable from the culture. A religion and the culture were together. It was like one unit. You could not be a Jew if you don't follow Judaism. Well, that's interesting branch. Now let's talk about the different holidays the Jewish people observe, because it's important. You know, every holiday starts on the day, an evening before, and lasts until the evening of the day. For example, first one is Passover. Passover is a holiday, lasts 7 or 8 days, and celebrates Jewish freedom from slavery in Egypt. It's Exodus. Exodus, it's a story when the Hebrew God passed over houses of Jewish families and saved their children during the plague that was said to have killed all firstborn Egyptians. Remember, I told you that plagues of Egypt, 10 plagues of Egypt, the last one that then all firstborn Egyptians were killed. That day, the angel of death passed over all houses of Jews. And after that, Pharaoh let them go. And that was the beginning of Exodus, beginning of the freedom of Jewish people, and Passover. That's celebration of freedom from slavery. Next one is Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, it's the birth of the universe and humanity. It's pretty much Jewish New Year. In that day, it's the common thing, dipping apple in the honey. You know, the people were smiling nowadays that don't try to dip your apple in the honey. It won't work anymore. It's talking about the fruit, not your iPhone. Another one is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is not a holiday. It's not something we celebrate. Not something. It's the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur is considered to be the holiest day of the year for Jews who typically spend it fasting and praying. You see, in Judaism, there is a belief that God writes your name for the next year in the book of life or book of death. It means if you are written in the book of life, you will live next year. If they write you in a book of death, that means you're going to die. So in that time, you don't know in what book you're going to end up. It's not up to you. It's up to God. And they usually wish each other, I wish you good writing. It means I wish you to be written into the good book, in the book of life. So you would be considered among the living for the next year. But because you don't know that day, you ask forgiveness. You ask forgiveness from everyone who surrounds you. You ask forgiveness from the people who you love. You tell them you love them because you may not have a chance to do it tomorrow. You don't know in what book you end up. Yom Kippur is not a holiday. It's a judgment day. And that's why it's so important. And another one is Hanukkah. It's a Jewish celebration known as the Festival of Light. It lasts 8 days, commemorates the rededication of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem after the Maccabees defeated the Syrian Greek over 2,000 years ago. What's interesting that in that time when they liberated the temple, they had to light the menorah, the candlelight. And there was no oil. It was oil only for 1 day. They had to send for that oil to be brought, but it took 7 days to bring it from that supply source. They didn't know what to do. They had to light the candle because they had to light the temple and wait for the delivery of that. And the miracle is that the light, that the oil in the light, which was supposed to last for 1 day, lasted for 8 days until the supply came. And therefore, in the Hanukkah, the Jews light up every day 1 candle. For every day, they were waiting for the oil to come for the supply. The miracle of the light. the Hanukkah. And another one, a holiday we'll talk about, is the Purim. Purim is a Jewish holiday, celebrates the time when the Jewish people in Persia were saved from extermination. That time when the king of Persia gave order for Jewish people to be exterminated, but thanks to the one beautiful girl who convinced king not to do that, or at least give Jewish people right to defend themselves, Jewish people were able to fight back and they were saved from extermination. That's a very light holiday. It's like, well, I wouldn't say Halloween, but in Purim, people usually laugh and dressed up and they play plays. So very, very light, very funny, very joyful holiday. Now, what else you need to remember about Judaism? First of all, it's the dietary requirement. Dietary requirement means that the food is supposed to be prepared by the certain rules. That food is considered to be kosher, and kosher food is good to eat. The food is not prepared by the certain rules, considered to be treif, and you cannot eat it at all. There are certain rules of the preparation of the food. There is certain food which considered to be kosher or not kosher. Plus, there is a rule of not mixing the milk and meat. All dairy products and meat products are separated for good. It means in every Jewish family who observes the Judaism, you have to have two refrigerators, one for dairy products, one for meat. You have to have two things and two supply, like the knives and other cans, which you cannot mix the dairy products and the meat. On the tray, you cannot put together meat and milk. If you bring your tray to the patient who is Jewish rabbi, and it will be meat and milk on the same plate, he will not take it. You have to bring two different trays. The utensils must be wrapped. You cannot unwrap them and give it to them. They have to do it themselves. They have to have time for prayer before they take the food. There are many different rules in Judaism, but we wouldn't have time to cover all of them, because that means we would have to actually spend an entire day, actually more than a day. We would spend a long time to learn about this wonderful religion.